Good afternoon, everybody. Absolute pleasure and privilege to be able to speak with you today. Thank you so much for joining this session on optimizing your tech stack for scale. And really, it's a bit of a change of scene and change of pace here, because really what we're going to be talking about is actually some of the operational challenges that occur as a function of scale and some of those growing pains. So firstly, for me, my name is Marvin Fletcher Rogers. I am the software and technology industry principal here at Sage, focused, and Sage supports organizations from pretty much sole trader right through to enterprise across a variety of tools, including HR, finance, and payroll. Within Sage, my particular focus is what we refer to as our medium segment, which effectively supports our scaling kind of mid-sized growth organizations, predominantly with our cloud-native platform, Sage Intacct, which is a financial platform that provides scaling multi-entity, multi-location, multi-region, multi-currency organizations with the ability to manage their finance operations and speak to their operation tools as well. And in terms of the conversation today, what I really wanted to do over the next 20 or so minutes was to touch on some of the typical growing pains or challenges we see when we engage with organizations, and certainly some of the research we've done in the past around scaling organizations. We'll then talk about some of the approaches or even just considerations to be aware of that help to insulate against some of those challenges before providing a little bit of a view on some of the advantages in getting it right on that basis. I will try to leave time for Q&A. I appreciate we've just caught up on time, so I'll leave a few minutes with Q&A if possible. If not, and being respectful of my other speakers, please do feel free to catch us by the booth. We're just upstairs. Big banner, can't miss it. So myself and my team are more than happy to take any questions that come up. So let's start. So when I talk about scale and when we refer to scale, it's almost that secondary phase after showing that initial growth as an organization. And scale is really the way in which growth is made a bit more sustainable. And here at Sage, through Sage Intacct, we've been fortunate enough over the years to work with thousands of technology organizations backed by hundreds of P and VC firms. And Bessemer in particular, we've worked with closely to try and identify some of those patterns that exist, broadly speaking, when organizations are growing and scaling. And one of the ways in which that's manifested is this idea of what that operational finance or back office or tech stack or system landscape or tech strategy or whatever kind of tool or term you've heard around just getting the right technology framework to support a business as it scales. So if we think about some of the patterns, and broadly this is focused on organizations going through funding, but actually, broadly speaking, it does cover some of the key challenges and some of the key focus areas, at least. So at startup, typically, the focus, unsurprisingly, is on cash. Cash runway pretty much dominates any decision-making, any investment. Any of those conversations are about trying to demonstrate product market fit while there's enough cash in the organization to support that. As typically at this point, from a technology perspective or from a tech investment perspective, there's very little focus on that. Actually, the main focus is on the secret sauce, the piece of technology that organization is trying to test within the market. So you would typically see a bit of a mismatch of free-to-use applications, lightweight tools, purchased on an ad hoc basis as the organization grows. Then, when we move into a slightly more established, pretty much kind of initial funding circle where there is a little bit of investment to think about actually how we turn this proven product market into a more scalable, sustainable revenue model. There tends to be a little bit now more of a focus from a business away from cash and actually towards showing some of those unit economics. So whether that's lifetime value or acquisition costs, almost to track a bit of a route to profitability at an early stage. And with that comes the need for slightly more sophisticated tools, at least to kind of measure the core operating process. So the quote to cash, for example, there's anything involved in the top line, and also controlling some of those cost levers. So we tend to see point tools being acquired at this point. And then as organizations scale through that growth area, and if you kind of consider this to be the double, triple approach, this is where there's actually now significant growth is required to justify the same level of investment. And here at this point, the focus is around not just growing through new customer acquisition, but actually proving that the product not only fits within the market, but it's consumed on an expanded rate by its users, but also at the same time, it's those users being retained and multiple services and offering are being provided to that user to really show that user base being able to expand. Here, because of that requirement, it's important for now all the tools that the business uses at its disposal to understand what's going on, to be a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit more aligned, a little bit more conjoined, to really drive and demonstrate to investors, to the auditors, to even large-scale customers, and certainly in the enterprise space, that this organization is really there to support them and partner with them moving forwards. And then, as the company grows and scales and gets through that particular phase, the key element is to show that the go-to-market engine is a bit more profitable. So a capital-efficient go-to-market engine now starting to be profitable, and then for those very fortunate kind of towards the top, get to take that capital-efficient market into adjacent regions, whether it's new products, mergers, acquisitions, or even hitting new markets or different parts of the segment. Now, the undercurrent that pretty much underpins that growth journey is that, and it's probably unsurprisingly when you think about the way in which teams operate, is that when we think about certainly the startup arena, when you've got a low number of staff, people wearing multiple hats, people responsible for multiple kind of deliverables and functions within the organization, what tends to happen is as these organizations grow and these people become teams and these teams become independent functions, unsurprisingly, given the way in which tech is invested in over time, there tends to be a natural communication silo that exists between those teams. Now, those silos can be pretty critical and pretty damaging when you are thinking about servicing a customer. So if your sales team and your delivery team, your supply chain team, your finance team, your credit control, your customer success teams don't have a good, tight understanding of what that customer is, you've got the ability to potentially create friction and create some displeasure, which again, if we think about the idea of as you grow and scale, you're hoping to get not just new customers, but the existing ones, and you're looking to retain that net dollar retention, that you really want to be making sure you're providing a frictionless customer journey on that basis. Unsurprisingly, when people have different tools and systems and applications that they use to deliver their role, and they're running in silos, quite often the same thing is being done in multiple places, often duplicating the effort, but at the same time, potentially creating errors, risks, creating reconciliations, and at the very least, just creating an environment where there is no clear understanding of where the business is going. And typically, this is where spreadsheets tend to kind of rue, that everyone gets comfortable and pushes into spreadsheets, which of course comes with a lot of challenges around version control, ownership, permission management, and even just real-time nature of information. All of that pretty much crescendos into this lack of trust in the final figures. So if we think back to the growth scale, there are some pretty key measures that need to be driven to demonstrate that proof of growth and that proof of scale. Those metrics rely on the information that's being fed into it to be timely, to be trustworthy, to be reliable, to be contextual, and at the very least, to be agreed upon. So unsurprisingly, a lot of that leads to some poor reporting governance that exists across the board. So how do we think about addressing these? Well, there are a few approaches to try and reduce those communication silos. The typical kind of low-hanging fruit that organizations tend to employ is this idea of integrating those applications together. And again, depending on the technology strategy, it may be get a single system to do everything, get a platform to support the majority of things, or actually get best-of-breed, best-in-class applications that allow people to purchase or leverage and consume the tools that make sense, the time that it makes sense, but ensuring they're part of the wider same technology strategy on that basis. And one of the ways in which, one of the advantages in whichever of those approaches you take is that what you're trying to do fundamentally is create a trusted system of record. When sales, when finance, when procurement, when anyone looks at any customer or supplier, they should really be seeing ultimately not the same information, not the same level of detail, but certainly the same information. They should be seeing the context around that entire arrangement. And that system of record actually helps to serve customers better. Because if sales are seeing the same information that finance have past around engagements with existing overdue invoices, or the delivery team or the customer success team have seen a drop-off in usage. If that information isn't being fed and shared accordingly, it's very, very difficult to provide customers with a level of service and attention that's required to retain them. Equally, once we've broken down some of those silos, there are some immediate efficiencies that exist. And one of those typical ways of doing so is to integrate the likes of a CRM with a core finance application, maybe with a reporting tool, or a delivery tool, or even a support management tool. One of the efficiencies that tends to come from that is at least the removal of the duplication of effort exists on that basis. Equally, in doing so, particularly at that sort of early growth stage, that's where the quote to cash and the P2P process really become a way to try and control a little bit of the working capital and preserve some of that critical cash runway on that basis. But beyond automating for the sake of efficiency, it's vitally important, and particularly in this current environment where there is an element of, there's a scrutiny on information, whether it's investors, customers, auditors, there's a scrutiny on the level of information, particularly when organizations are growing. One of the key moments, or one of the key measures to put in place is actually operational governance. So a lot of the time, and I engage with a lot of organizations where quite often technology is considered the silver bullet that's going to come in and fix and solve everything. But actually, quite often, what it can do is expose any challenges that are there, and therefore, it really serves a great opportunity when thinking about technology and technology stack is to think about the process governance that needs to go alongside that. Particularly when you go through that route of growing in an aggressive manner, what would work when you're a $2 million £2 million company right through to a £50 million company is going to be different. So ensuring there's a right level of scale, and that's where things like approval routings and having approval processes and the right access to controls and image and permissions within the application become really critical within the business alongside the applications and tools themselves. And then if you think about the value of getting the information right, so we break down the silos of communication, we bring teams together, we align them so they're very much looking at the same level of information together, and we get them to do so in a scalable fashion that is not only using the best-of-breed applications, but also using the right kind of process governance, is the ultimate result is better information and more confidence in the information that is picked up on that basis. So what does this best-in-class tech stack look like? So if we think about what we're trying to solve, we're trying to create a trusted single source of truth. We're trying to improve operational efficiency, so run more effectively, reduce duplication of effort, but also at the same time start to bring that governance, and then finally improve the reporting and the insights. Well, there are a few ways in which that can be done. I mentioned earlier that the kind of low-hanging fruit a lot of organizations go for at this point is typically the CRM side of things, so integrating the CRM or the commercial system in with the finance system, at least so that when a customer moves through an engagement cycle right through to actually collecting cash, recognizing revenue, all of that information is held together. One of the advantages in doing that is, and removing those silos, and one of the ways to almost remove the reliance on spreadsheets is to leverage role-based applications, systems that allow individuals who have different lenses on the business to be able to see the information that's relevant. A good example of that is having different dedicated dashboards for different teams. Having the ability, based on the right roles and process governance, to ensure that when people are accessing those dashboards, they've got the ability to interrogate the information, but also find the context within which that information sits. Beyond, from an automation perspective, once we've got that process governance in place and we've identified that the information, certainly at source level, is being entered correctly, the ability to consolidate that information, whether that's financial consolidation to see the full picture, particularly when organizations are starting to look at different regions, different kind of business models, it becomes critical. And one of the advantages of having a platform that supports the ability to not just look at entities in isolation, but actually be able to comparatively look at the context within which they sit, provides the opportunity to make some real-time decision-making. And then finally, we always refer to kind of engaging with any kind of digital transformation project is really a reporting project in disguise. We're always trying to get insight, and by changing operations, by changing the reliability, and changing the trust and the governance that comes with those processes, we're really trying to get insight, which is then going to allow that process to work more effectively. So one of the big key advantages in automating as a process, but also with the help of the various different applications, is that you get access to information faster. If the finance team, for example, can close the books in fewer days, that provides immediate insight to the FP&A team or the core reporting team to then be able to identify where the next level of investment is. And particularly for high growth organizations, the need to be able to plan things like revenue forecast and cash flow become critical. And that is typically held up by manual, sort of repetitive tasks like reconciliations and adjustments and various different kind of repetitive kind of challenges that occur effectively drive that. So the idea is by being able to almost remove a lot of that manual effort, we're creating time that can be passed back into the business to deliver slightly more value-added work, but then also to be able to drive the relevant insights. And I mentioned earlier, as the organization moves through those various different lenses, what tends to happen is the level of information, or certainly the appetite for that information, increases quite significantly. It goes from being able to know what the top line figures is or what the cash runway looks like, down to how a particular product operates in a particular market, in a particular geography, with a particular cohort of customers. That level of dimensional depth and that level of segmentation that's required effectively drives the need to not only change the way in which information is inputted, but to have tools that are reliable to be able to slice and dice that information. And when we talk about any kind of climate of uncertainty, one of the strongest ways to insulate against that level of uncertainty is to have the level of information to be able to interrogate, view, see what works, fail fast, and also be able to identify opportunities that maybe the revenue model or the forecast model, the cash flow model, didn't quite necessarily anticipate, and being able to see that information as quickly, as effectively as possible. So we go back to the exam question of what is happening as kind of organizations are scaling. Well, we've got teams. Individuals turn to teams, turn to functions that are operating in their own way. They may purchase applications that are purpose-built to support particular components as they grow. Those teams those tools themselves create a bit of a challenge, create a bit of a mess, and therefore lead to a lot of inefficiencies and even lack of trust in the information. And that ultimately means that there's reporting challenges that exist across the organization. Well, how does a best-in-class tool solve that? Well, maintaining a single source of truth, whether that's through integrating your CRM, your core finance platform, your customer success tools together, or getting a single application that serves the majority of the information that's required to report on the business, tries to insulate against that and provide visibility to organizations. Equally, having the ability or that thought process around a continuous close, so not waiting till month end to do a lot of those pretty repetitive and predictable tasks, having the tools in place that manage things like revenue recognition, that manage things like bank reconciliation, that manage components like deferrals that you know about, provide the framework to not only reduce the month end and provide information faster, but also sets the organization up in a way that is audit ready, in a way that is ready for that next level of investment, ready for that next level of additional scrutiny that will invariably occur. And then finally, the advantage of getting all this right is having real-time reports that don't not only reflect the position, the growth, the scale of the organization, but also can go further and predict more accurately and reflect how the organization is trending, so that actually as we move through more periods of uncertainty, you've got the ability to run the necessary what-if analysis, or to run the necessary level of kind of dimensional depth around those to know what works in what region, with what product, with what customers at any moment in time. I mentioned I'll leave a few minutes for questions just around any of that approach, whether it's around the technology, the conversations with customers on that basis.
Question, Marvin.
Sure.
This stage is huge.
It's humongous.
About social distance. consistency. 1 second. Okay, now I've been asking all of our speakers this really today, because I think it's really important that we look at some real world examples where we can. And obviously you don't need to name specific companies here, but can you share an example or even 2 examples of a success story of how Sage's solutions have helped a tech company specifically scale and achieve long-term success?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I'll go for 2 ends of the spectrum, because I think there are 2 typical approaches to this. There's the approach of getting the right tools in place ahead of scale, and then the approach of solving the problem later down the line. And we've got a couple of organizations so there's I'll try and see how coy I can do this, but effectively a high growth UK-based professional service automation, so effectively project and resource management. But there's an AI-driven professional services organization that were operating with a few entities, and actually were working pretty fine with their kind of starter accounting package, but decided that to get to the next level of growth and the really aggressive growth that they were putting on themselves and pressure on themselves as the business, they decided to make the move to a more scalable application, so that when it comes to new entities, new regions, when it comes to new business models which they were looking to involve, they weren't having to address it then. So they effectively went ahead of the curve, got the right systems in place, and what they found is they were able to grow without necessarily having to increase headcount, which is always critical, particularly in this environment, but also the level of information that was provided by having things like the billing, the revenue, and all of the top-line related metrics, including SaaS metrics, as they were a subscription-based business. Having that information was super impactful for not only pushing back to their investors and demonstrating their growth, but also being able to see which regions, which products worked in which areas, and allow them to actually identify opportunities. The other side is an organization that provide technology for financial crime, to prevent financial crime, and worked with large enterprise organizations. And they had previously gone through several different systems. They were rough. They had got to the point typically where they had a bit of a mess of different applications through different acquisitions. And what they were looking to do was effectively streamline that information. So and they'd thought about pulling everything into one report or a reporting tool or Excel, but actually decided to change the underlying platform to unify everything and get a full consolidated picture. In their case, what really surprised them is they were able to take their close down from 7 days to 2 to 3 days, which meant actually not so much from a headcount perspective, but it meant that there was an awful lot of value-added time that finance team had. Now that value-added time was then repurposed into what they then refer to as an internal consultancy team, and that consultancy team will then effectively providing consultancy to the rest of the business. So moving that finance function up, moving the function from effectively back office to front office. So there are some advantages in doing this beyond just the operations of closing the audit and providing information quickly, but it also provides the opportunity, as information is the antidote to a lot of the uncertainty. It's providing the information that's then going to allow the function, whatever that function is, to transcend and have a seat at the table.
Okay, thank you, Marvin. Now, if anyone has any more questions, there is a stand upstairs on level 1. I'm sure that Marvin will be more than happy to answer any questions you might have.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Marvin, for the session. Thank you.
Awesome.